Lawyers, what was the sleaziest thing you've seen another lawyer try to slip into a document/contract? I was told something really amusing recently. My client has directed me to is basically lawyer code for this dude pays my bills, and I don't agree with him, but I have to make a good faith effort to get my paycheck. So please, judge and opposing counsel, please don't believe I'm stupid enough to think this will work. I see my client has directed me to a lot. Yeah, I can imagine that just comes with the territory of being a lawyer. You have to be able to sell ice to an Eskimo. Even if you don't necessarily agree with your client's point of view, you have to create and frame an argument that is in their favor, and, such is life. Next story. I got sucked into a dispute with a former employer over intellectual property rights in an employment agreement. They kept trying to sneak in a clause into the agreement in every other paragraph that gave them ownership of, full rights/responsibilities for, and access to anything I did remotely related to programming or computers, outside of work while not on the clock. It was so broad, even my non-lawyer ass knew it was an awful thing. It became a deadlock argument back and forth until I asked if they were accepting liability for any illegal activities I could perform outside of work. Suffice to say, those clauses disappeared by COB the next day in the agreement. Next story. A law firm which I worked helped out with a probate. The father, deceased, had 2 adult children who had testified that, yes, the most recent will had not included the half-his-age girlfriend of the past month. The attorney for the gold digger sent a letter to the children which said, in essence, if you reconsider your testimony, I'll fly you out, pay for your stay, and pay you $7,000 to change your testimony. The first person to reconsider gets double, but only the first. If you don't change your testimony, I will come after you with every resource an attorney has to make your life miserable. It's the sleaziest thing I've ever seen. Plus, it put the firm in a tough position. Report him to the bar while the case was still ongoing, it would look like you were trying to influence the case. Report him after, and it looks like you're being petty and vengeful. Edit. People are asking what ended up happening. The kids changed their testimony, though it's not clear they actually got money for it or not. I'm thinking they did. So the gold digger got the money instead of the charity it had originally been meant to go to. The attorneys in the office where I worked called the sleazebag and asked, what's up with this letter? He immediately sent out a second letter which said, I did not mean to indicate I would pay for your testimony, nor did I threaten. It's your fault if you thought I said those things. Both letters were sent to the Bar Association, and I don't know if anything has happened since. Next story. I once sent a contract adverse counsel for their client's signature. We had negotiated the final contract. This guy was a real sleazeball. He changed the contract to include a favorable provision for his client, had his client sign, and then sent back to us for countersignature. I don't remember how he caught it, but that's borderline malpractice right there. Next story. I get a lot of clients where the consultation goes something like this. Client, can I do X? Me. No, X is illegal, and therefore you can't do X. Client, okay, I'll do X anyway, even without your help. Me, okay, but now that I know you plan to do X, I can no longer represent you, because I cannot assist in illegal behavior. Client, can we pretend we never had this conversation? Me, no, we can't pretend we never had this conversation. I get a lot of those. I'm guessing they then go to another lawyer that they lie to. And a big thank you to OP here for being a stand-up lawyer and just a generally good human being. It's one thing to argue a case that you don't agree with. It's another to engage in illegal behavior just for a paycheck. So I like that the standards are somewhat set in stone there. Next story. In one case that I worked on, a company had donated a bunch of money to various things in a small town that they were polluting, and the documents always had a clause basically saying, and you can never sue us for anything. The people accepting the contracts just thought it meant anything related to this donation, or whatever, but nope. Next story. Most of the time, other lawyers don't really try to slip sleazy stuff into documents, etc., but there are some lawyers who will try to do really sleazy things in other ways. It's really rare, however. This is primarily because your reputation in the legal community counts for a lot, contrary to popular perception. We settle most cases. As a result, trust matters. Example, I'm a plaintiff's lawyer. If I pretend that every case I have is a $1 million case, make stuff up, pound the table, manipulate witnesses, documents, etc., it will eventually become well known. The problem there is that when I really do have a $1 million case, every defense lawyer in town will know that I have a reputation as a consummate bullcrapper who can't be trusted. Believe it or not, I actually settled a case for $1 million yesterday. It was a class action and was legitimately worth that amount, but I have a lot of other cases that are not worth that much money, and I won't pretend that they are. If we, my firm, had a reputation as a bunch of lying scumbags, we would have never been able to secure that settlement. Next story. I'm not a lawyer, but when my parents got divorced, it was messy, real messy, and it dragged on for 3 years. Finally, my dad got his day in court, but almost had to reschedule because my mom owed her lawyer $2,000, and he was threatening to quit on the spot unless she paid him right then. My dad agreed to pay the lawyer for her as long as it was in the settlement, so they quickly made a new settlement. Something that was also changed was my mom was supposed to get half the money from the sale of their house, about $100,000. Well, I guess her lawyer was pissed at her because in the settlement, it never specified when my dad had to sell the house, and he got to keep the house until he sold it. So he could have kept the house forever. After she had signed all the paperwork, then actually read the settlement, she was pretty pissed. My dad ended up selling the house for way cheaper than it was worth several years later. Next story. Haven't seen any of my lawyer colleagues try anything sleazy. What I have seen are some really sleazy conduct from their clients, though. Example, man up for child abuse charges and wife abuse. He's physically and mentally abused his son from age 3 until age 16 when this case was brought to court due to an attempted self-unaliving by his sister. Also, a party in the case. Defendant, father, has over several years forced his son to attend a psychologist for various reasons, some of which were relevant to the beatings the son received. During the trial, the defendant produces a signed document from said psychologist where she and a colleague of hers both assign the blame of the abuse onto the son. The father has managed to convince 2 psychologists specialized in child psychology that somehow the child is at fault for being beaten. This caused quite an uproar in both the courtroom, which happened to be visited by a court reporter, not a commonality in Sweden, who went and wrote a long article about this case he had witnessed, and also in the psychology department. I wasn't a lawyer when this case was presented. I was a plaintiff in the case. It had an immense impact on why I later became a lawyer, even though I rarely work criminal cases these days. Next story. Contract theory is based on a notion of bilateral agreement to terms. Lawyers know this, and so they tend not to sleaze up contracts because they know how many ways there are to argue against unfair or deceptive provisions. Corporate entities, however, rely on people not being lawyers. So they write sleazy contracts and rely on the money they make from 9 people not challenging unfair provisions to offset the minor court costs of the 10th guy who brings a suit. Next story. So as a regular person, I managed to sneak something into my current apartment lease. If I signed before a certain date, I forgot, rent was like $50 a month cheaper, or $500 over the course of the 10-month lease. When I failed to sign the cheap one, they sent me a more expensive one. I signed the cheap one and sent it in with my first month and deposit, and the lady at the desk accepted it, and I saved $500 because, and I suspect this is true with all corporate rental companies in my town, they don't actually check to see if it's the same document. I think that's exactly what happened, so good heads up play by UOP, and, use that $500 to do something nice. Next story. Scummiest thing I ever saw another lawyer do. The company I work for was planning on leasing a fairly large parcel of undeveloped property. I was involved with the lease negotiations from the beginning, and they were taking quite a while. Basically, there were constant revisions to the proposed lease. Finally, after about 8 months of negotiation, we appear to have an agreement. I send over a copy of the lease to the other company's attorney for final review, and their client's signature if acceptable. They send a signed copy back about a day later, indicating that the contract is acceptable. I do a final review before I send it up to the executive to sign, since he didn't actually read these contracts, he just signed them after reading our summaries. And I notice that there have been small but significant changes to the contract, all in the other company's favor. Unlike all the prior revisions, which had been clearly marked, this guy just made changes without notifying us. Next story. My intellectual property law professor told us a story where a company had a guy draw some blueprints, fired him, then changed the dates to make it seem like they had the prior art high ground. My professor and his partner tracked the guy down. He was in a dance band somewhere in the Midwest, and talked to him. He said he was so proud of the blueprints he drafted that he sent copies home to his mother with the original dates. The original documents were presented in court, which proved they altered the dates and the company paid out the ass. Next story. I'm not a lawyer, but an employment contract I was asked to sign had many pages and many places to sign. A couple of them had to do with giving the company I was applying to rights to my image and likeness. I just carefully removed those pages, then returned the rest. I don't think they noticed, and I was hired. Another company that I applied to sold tobacco and tobacco products, and they wanted the right to take out a life insurance policy on me, naming themselves as beneficiary. I walked away from that one. Next story. We just had a real estate contract where we had verbally agreed to a price and conditions. When a buyer's agent sent the contract through, it was for $2,000 less than our agreed upon price and had several rather unnecessary repairs that would have cost us several $1,000s to finish. Had we signed it without reading closely, we would have been obligated to perform those things that we had never initially agreed to. On top of it all, the buyer is trying to back out of the contract now, even after she signed it. It's all very frustrating. Next story. Not a lawyer, but I work in the legal department for a charity. My favorite thing I've seen in a will was a clause which stated, after my death, I request my loyal friend so-and-so to destroy my laptop and PC hard drives. He knows why. Oh, and I've also had 2 tons of adult content bequeathed in a will to the charity too. Needless to say, we didn't accept that legacy. Yeah, this has to be a joke, right? But nevertheless, slippery slope. Don't accept the legacy. Good move, OP. Next story. I've been an attorney since June 2013, and I already have advice for newer attorneys that I had to learn on my own. Chatty attorneys are dangerous. Here's how. You're ready for a hearing or other court appearance, and as per the norm, something they do not teach in law school, you're waiting for 45 minutes for the judge to show up. This is before the judge even calls the calendar, which involves waiting another half hour unless you're lucky enough to be high on the list. The opposing counsel notices you and makes small talk. Be careful. Yes, it is true many attorneys are friends outside of work, even if they are adversaries in the courtroom. I've seen it, and have some friends. However, be careful. Small talk will turn towards the case you're both appearing on, and they'll say something like, "Man, this case is something else, right? If only there was a sign," or something similar. How I was burned. I can't remember what was asked or said during the small talk, which I assumed, my bad, was just banter while waiting for the judge. But once he arrived and we were called, the opposing counsel used what I said to prove his point without context. When the judge asked if I said that, I did, but had to add that he left out context, and the judge didn't care. Hearing lost. Ever since then, as soon as an opposing counsel gets chatty, I shut down with answers or go play on my phone like I got an email. Be careful. Next story. I used to work in divorce. I learned that if you included an offer of attorney's fees to be paid to the other attorney as part of an offer really favorable to your client, it seemed that other attorney fought a hell of a lot harder to get their client to settle. Not that I'm cynical towards this profession, mind you. Next story. This rarely happens. You'll tank your reputation and other lawyers will refuse to accommodate your requests in the future. If you have a bad reputation, every single case is going to be a tedious fight instead of a negotiation, and your clients are eventually going to figure out that you aren't effective. That said, I've only had 2 lawyers try to slip things in. The sleaziest was a general practice attorney doing a divorce. In my state, divorce proceedings require that you submit a current financial statement almost every time you appear in court. These statements are detailed, but basically outline the extent of your client's assets and debts. Every time I got his client's financial statement, I knew it was falsified. His client appeared to be broke on paper, but anyone could see that his lifestyle said otherwise. Since his client had to sign all of the financial statements, he first played it off as though his client was deceiving him. We did some forensic accounting, and through an up of his own doing, we found out that he had a trust set up for his client a long time ago, and he was managing the trust. Guess what we found in that trust? A few $100,000 socked away in the years leading up to the divorce. Guess what was never listed on any of his financial statements? I presented the lawyer with what we found, and he immediately changed his tune and disclosed everything. He played it off to the judge as though he had just found this account and had been duped by his client. It wasn't his last item of stupidity on the long list that was this case, but it was the final doubt to his credibility with the judge. Seriously, his name was right there on the account in the documents. Next story. As the gavel was coming down on the final settlement of my divorce, my lawyer stopped the judge and said, "Each party is responsible for their own legal expenses in this matter." My wife's attorney shrugged his shoulders, said okay, and it was done. I've always felt a bit guilty about this one, because it was an understanding all along that I was responsible for both legal bills. It just never made it to the final written agreement. Assuming I was paying, she hired a much more expensive attorney than I did. Her fees were $15 to $20K. Mine were under $10K. Next story. Okay, I'm just going to say this to every effing person out there who has to review contracts with any regularity. You need to invest in two things immediately. Version control software. Being able to finalize document versions and then version them up whenever you need to change a document is huge. Absolutely huge. Redlining software. Doesn't really matter which one you pick, as they're all the same. You can even do dot compares in Word, though they're admittedly kind of crappy and not really as good as any of the specialized products out there. The reason these two tools are your best friend is because they give you so much more peace of mind when your workflow looks like this. Generate document. That's version 1. It says V1 in the bottom right-hand corner of the contract. Send contract to opposing counsel for initial review. That guy comes back with changes. Save this into your system as version 2 and indicate in the comments section of your version control that version 2 corresponds to the first round comments sent over by opposing counsel. Redline V2 against V1 to see what the other guy changed. If you're working with someone of good repute or a big firm, you'll generally find a redline attached. F that thing. Just redline it yourself. If you have good software, it shouldn't take more than the time it takes you to get up and take a piss for the red line to run. When you're done, you now have a diagram of all the crap that's been changed from your own contract. Version up. You're now at version 3. This is the version in which you accept or reject certain comments in the document that opposing counsel just sent you. When finished with V3, run a red line against V2. Send opposing counsel a copy of V3 and the V3 to V2 red line so it's clear what, if anything, you changed from the version he sent across. You can basically rinse and repeat with this. The reason I recommend constantly versioning up and running a red line anytime the other side sends something across is twofold. 1, you'll know right off the bat what kind of person you're dealing with. 2, you can totally call them out on that crap and CC their client to the extent that the situation warrants it. And 3, being a lawyer is essentially about covering your ass and your client's ass. If you're not taking every extra precaution to identify and isolate risk in your client's engagement, you are effing up. Next story. I had a landlord of a large apartment building that tried to sneak shady language into the lease and make it easy for them to evict people. It said that either party may terminate this agreement by giving 30 days notice at any time. But here is the thing. They gave you the option up front to sign a 6-month or 3-month lease. The 3-month lease had higher monthly rent. I didn't know if I wanted to stay at this place for 6 months, but when I saw the clause in the lease that said, either party may terminate this agreement at any time by giving 30 days notice, I thought, why the hell not? I think I spent a few minutes wondering why they even had different leases, but then I decided I didn't care. The leases were virtually identical, except that one of them had lower rent. Flash forward 3 months. I want to move out of this place. The neighbors smoke in the hallways, and my apartment always smells like cigarettes. There's a really noisy bar right next door that started getting loud and rowdy around 5 a.m. A friend of mine's roommate moved out, and I wanted to move in with her. So I went down to the front desk with 30 days written notice, and they say I can't get out of it because I signed a 6-month lease. I got my lease out and pointed to the sentence, either party may terminate this agreement by giving 30 days notice at any time. I wish I was joking about this. The woman told me that that clause was there so they could get rid of problem tenants, but it didn't mean I could just back out of the lease. I pointed out that it said either party, and she said that's just because their lawyer told them that it had to say that because it was illegal for it to say the landlord can terminate this agreement. I tried to explain to her that she can't just pretend the lease says something other than what it says, and that the law doesn't just mean you have to change the language. It means that if the landlord can terminate, then the tenant needs to be able to terminate as well. These words actually mean something, and they're not just fancy ways to get around the law. She told me she'd have to talk to the owner and she'd get back to me. She didn't after a week. My cousin's a lawyer, so I called him and asked his opinion. He looked at the lease, and he said that it seemed so simple and straightforward that he was confused by it. He said that the only language on the lease that even suggested it was for a 6-month term was the title of the document, which was 6-month lease. Otherwise, there was nothing in there that said I was obligated to rent his apartment from them for the full 6 months. He said that the way it looked to him was that I fulfilled my obligations under the lease. I had given them 30 days written notice. They had seen it and acknowledged it. They signed a lease that said that's what it took to terminate the agreement. He said that he suspected that they understood the lease perfectly and that they were just trying to intimidate me into staying. He recommended weighing the risk of them taking me to court, even though they didn't really have a leg to stand on, against my desire to move out, and if I wanted to go ahead with it, to just remind them weekly by email that I was moving out at the end of the month and that I was happy to accommodate them, showing the room in the meantime. That way, if they did take me to court, I could at least demonstrate a good faith effort to follow the lease the way it was written. So I did. The first week they didn't respond to the email. The second week they didn't respond. So I stopped at the front desk one morning and asked. The lady said, "We talked to our lawyer. We'll be showing your room next week." I said, "So you know that I'm leaving at the end of the month, and you know that what I'm doing does not break the lease at all." She gave me a dirty look and said, "Yeah, you're off the hook, sweetie," like I was some dirtbag who had taken advantage of her. To my surprise, they returned my deposit in full. Well, it sounds like they didn't have any legal discourse to stand on, so yeah, they had no choice but to comply or face consequences and ramifications themselves. So good job, OP, for doing your homework. Next story. I saw a prenuptial agreement that stated everything husband makes is 100% husband's. Everything wife makes is 100% wife's. However, if wife works at husband's business, all of her labor is considered a gift to husband. She won't be paid and won't get a share of the business. The wife didn't speak English. The husband hired her attorney for her. The husband paid her attorney extra to backdate the prenuptial so it looked like she had more time to review it. And husband got a nice free employee out of the deal. Next story. I'm late, but whatever. My dad used to work for a big law firm in NYC. They did bankruptcy work, among other things. One time, the board of directors of a retirement community decided to sell the actual land it was on to a real estate trust, a trust owned by the board of directors. They immediately foreclosed on themselves, evicted the residents, and personally took all the profits from the liquidated assets. It gets worse. It was in a small town in upstate New York. Everyone in the town worked for the retirement home in some capacity. They also all had stock in the home. When the BOD foreclosed, they lost their jobs and all the stock they had, paid back to them at pennies on the dollar. My dad quit the law firm that day. Next story. My dad runs a food company, and one of their suppliers sneaked in a clause stating that all liability for mislabeled allergens lands on my dad's company, meaning that if they bought guaranteed nut-free sugarcane and someone with a nut allergy died from eating the product made with that sugarcane, then my parents' company would be held liable. This, as you might imagine, is insane. My dad, however, caught it. Our lawyers had completely missed it, as did the lawyers of one of our customers, who we knew bought from a similar supplier. Catching this was huge because the cost of missing it and having an issue come up would have been devastating. We, of course, told our customer we caught the clause, and they ended up dropping the shared supplier entirely and refusing to do business with them. Next story. This wasn't something slipped into a contract, but I still couldn't believe the other lawyer trying to get away with it. I was representing the mother in a child custody proceeding. She was a recovering alcoholic, so the father had custody. My client had to fight tooth and nail for any access. We had a court order saying, reasonably, that neither party could discuss the court proceedings with the children. Well, during one visit, one of the children asked my client when they'd be able to see her again. She said something like, "Hopefully we'll find out soon once we go to court." A few days later, I'm speaking to the other lawyer, and he says this was a breach of the order by my client, and that the father was therefore denying any further access. I wrote him a letter in which my barely controlled rage was evident, and soon the father relented, but I still couldn't believe the other lawyer would go along with it. Next story. Well, I'm not a lawyer. Hell, there wasn't even a lawyer involved. But there was a contract. When I was buying my house, between that time when my offer was approved and the closing, I discovered that someone had gone there and stolen parts of the AC unit. So I informed the sellers that this would have to be fixed before the inspection. So what they did was send someone out there and remove the unit completely to prevent it from being stolen again. Fine, I forget exactly what happened, but we, for some reason, missed our original closing date, and to get it extended, you sign like a little extension contract. They tried to slip into that contract that when they install the new AC, I would be responsible for any repairs or work that it required in case it was vandalized again from the time they put it in until the new closing. LOL, how about no? I struck that female dog right off there, and they agreed to my amendment. Next story. There was an estate I was working on a number of years ago that was super sleazy. There was one adult son who was the heir to his father's estate, and the only asset in the estate was the house in which they, descendant and the heir, held in joint tenancy. The estate attorney secured 2 mortgages on the property and a cash advance on the probate. Some of the money went to fixing up the house, basic cleaning and painting, to get the home ready to sell. The rest of the money, the attorney took the client to Vegas and spent it on hotels and strippers, which he tried to pass off as an estate expense. Receipts are in the court documents because you must account for everything. Several months after the attorney secured the funds and everything was spent, the heir was found wandering the streets looking for food. The heir's ex-wife checked in on him and found the house completely empty and her ex-husband sleeping, urinating, and defecating on the floor. The ex-wife filed a conservatorship for the heir and tried to set things back to right. Years of drinking destroyed his brain to the point that most of his capabilities were between a 1st and 3rd grade level. Couldn't even properly count change. The estate attorney that took the heir to Vegas had been disbarred and is sitting in prison. Doesn't seem worth it for less than $200K. Next story. In a sales of a $14 million asset portfolio, the agreement between the parties was that the profit distribution would be split in a certain way with the managers who were the sellers of the portfolio. The sellers could be removed and they would still retain their portion of the profit distribution minus the costs to everyone of new managers. Managers could basically be removed whenever. Buyer's counsel inserted a section that was hidden 3 levels down. That is, you had to bounce around the agreement at least 3 times before figuring out what it did. But basically, if the managers were removed, they would lose their profit distribution, which was the opposite of what everyone had agreed upon. It almost sank the deal. I'm glad I caught it. Next story. I see the following regularly. Not sure they're sleazy so much as snarky. Slipping a double negative into the drafting to reverse the meaning of the clause. Adding an innocuous 2 lines towards the end of the document saying that their client has no liability for anything under any circumstances, regardless of what's written elsewhere. Sticking a complex multi-page indemnity into the drafting that, when fully unwoven, basically means that your client has to pay their client back if their client ever has to pay your client something, making your client liable for their client's fraud. Lots of examples of having cake and eating it too. Next story. I knew a guy representing a lady in divorce whose husband, in addition to a lot of very bad things, opened and read all her mail, email, and personal correspondence. So he emailed her a letter saying they had a good case as long as her husband didn't retain a lawyer by the name of Mr. X, because he always wins and has powerful friends. Shockingly, Mr. X because he was opposing counsel in the divorce. Well, Mr. X was actually a drunk, useless sleazeball who never won anything and no one respected. She got it all. Next story. Not a lawyer, although I review all my company's legal documents. My company sells software for clinics to use. We sent through our standard software contract, and the NGO, in return, sent back their version of the contract. The contract itself is dodgy as hell, formatted incorrectly for starters, but worse was that there was a clause right near the end that stated all intellectual property involved in the project would be wholly owned by the NGO. That made me pretty pissed. Next story. My family was in an odd inheritance situation. When my father's mother died, my father inherited half of her house, the other half going to her new partner, to whom she wasn't married. When that man died, the house would be sold. My parents would get their 50% share. Now, my grandmother had purposely had it written down my parents would get 50% of the sale, not 50% of the profit. Turned out, the man had racked up debt after her death and had upped the mortgage as well, believing that would simply cut into my family's share. It didn't. His inheritance was unrelated to us, including his debt, and the mortgage didn't apply because of the wording and it was in his name, not shared. So when he died, his family from abroad found a lawyer with ties to their country to represent them to settle the sale. Their lawyer argued against everything. Why? Because his family was left with nothing, because of how bad his finances had been. The lawyer went as far as claiming, however, that we had altered the will, we were lying outright, and that our lawyer couldn't know that was in the original one, because he wasn't the grandmother's lawyer and legal witness at the time. We have the original document, sir, if you're interested. Dead silence. Some thoughts. Claims that the house wasn't even 50% ours. Our lawyer laughs, pulls up ownership documents from the county. Dead silence again. case closed. After all the stupidity and claims about us trying to screw them out of money, we stopped caring about their issues. Our lawyer was there for the sale, had the payment split up immediately, we got our share and walked away. They could have actually got us to settle or be more willing to work with them, but not after they hired that idiot. Next story. Okay, not a lawyer, but a lawyer had to be involved. My mom died when I was 4. My dad remarried when I was 7. He died when I was 10. I'm the youngest of 6 kids, so the situation was 6 orphan kids, a house, and a decent bit of money. Nothing huge, but the life insurance was sized to take care of 6 kids until we were out of college, and an evil step-female dog. Since the marriage lasted X years, she was entitled to at least a third of the inheritance. So 3 years of marriage and she gets a third of the insurance from 6 orphans. I was keeping out of the details, but it dragged on for a couple of years, and basically she was only awarded the 33%. She came back and said give me 40% and I won't appeal it for another 2 years. The family agreed and she got her 40% and we never saw her again. You know, it sucks to know that people like this ultimately win and get what they want in the end, but sometimes it's worth just kind of giving them that money to go away. But yeah, hate to hear that this gold digger got her fill. Next story. I briefly worked for a firm that was one of the less scrupulous I've worked at. Second week there, one of their well-known estates and trust lawyers was leaving. Rumors were he screwed something up, but another rumor is he was tired of their crap. Anyway, he sent out letters to some of his clients, alerting them of his departure. Most of the staff knew he was leaving on the last day of the month. One of the admins of the firm decides to tell everyone that when a client asked or called about this lawyer, we were to lie and say he was on vacation. This went on for nearing a month. All these poor clients trying to set up meetings or change wills or settle something in their trusts were told their lawyer was on vacation because they were afraid that these clients would leave the firm and follow him to his new office. I really don't think they would have any interest in staying with a firm that lied to them for a month. Next story. A relative of mine had a good case against a lawyer from a huge firm in town. Biggest media-wise, but not known for being good. The lawyer from the large firm was a baby lawyer, as she called him. My relative's client made an offer to settle. Then, baby lawyer said he couldn't take this offer to his client because his firm would not allow him to have his client settle for this much. She pulled baby lawyer aside and highly recommended that he take the offer to his client. Not exactly what you're looking for, but it's a no-no. Next story. I'm not a lawyer, but I do read contracts and work. We used to lease a big copier, back before most of our communication with our customers shifted from mail to the internet. We leased it from a well-known company whose name begins with the letter K and ends in ODAC. Well, the time came to lease a new machine, as the old one had over 4 million copies on the counter, and the repair guys were there so often I'd considered giving them their own desk in the office. Reading through the lease, my boss found a clause that stated that if the lessor's corporate stock price fell, our monthly lease rate would go up to help improve their profitability. Needless to say, we struck that out. Their sales guy said, "Nobody ever found that before," and they didn't challenge it. Next story. 3L here with a story I heard from another law student. This does not relate to a contract dispute, but it is still pretty awful. The lawyer offered to send demand letters on behalf of a website to IP addresses pirating content from the website. The letters demanded something like $3,000 to $5,000 be paid, or the violators would be sued. The website agreed to the offer. The lawyer then gets court orders to release individual IP addresses which pirated the website's content. Pretty soon, the lawyer is sending hundreds of motions requesting these orders. The judge of said court gets curious and starts to do some digging. He finds out that the website is a gay adult content website, and the IP addresses where the demand letters are being mailed to belong to families comprised of straight parents. So basically, the lawyer was sending these letters as a threat to out the husband or wife via a gay adult content piracy lawsuit. While legally sound, the lawyer was pretty much blackmailing people to give him hush money so their families would not find out. Everyone paid. Everyone. I think the lawyer made somewhere in the amount of $400,000 to $500,000 sending these letters in the span of a month or two.